Almost 7 years after he took refuge in Ecuador's embassy in London, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was dragged out of the building today by British police. It happened as Ecuador revoked his diplomatic status and the United States indicted him for conspiracy, calling for his extradition. This footage was shot by an agency owned by the Russia Today news channel. Assange was taken directly to a London court where he was charged with skipping bail. A judge found him guilty on the spot. He called Assange a narcissist and said his claim of an unfair hearing years ago was laughable. The first extradition proceeding for Assange is set for May 2nd. So for more on this, we're joined by Charlie Beckett. He is a journalism professor at the London School of Economics. He also wrote the book WikiLeaks News in the Networked Era. And Charlie is in Austin, Texas, where he is attending a conference. So Charlie, what was your initial reaction to Assange's arrest today?
Well, my initial reaction was that this is a mess, in a sense, of his own making. Julian Assange has been fabulously successful at making enemies. He's managed to fall out with any number of partners over the years, and he's quite clearly changed the direction of WikiLeaks. There's far less sympathy and support out there, but fundamentally what worries me is not what happens to Julian Assange. What worries me is that this becomes a precedent for an attack on the right of journalists to publish information, even if it's been obtained against the rules, as it were, or even against the law, if it's in the public interest.
And why is that? Why are you worried about this precedent?
Well, I think the Department of Justice have been very careful in the way that they've tried to phrase the indictment. As I understand it, it's the same terms that were rejected by the Attorney General under the Obama administration, but putting aside the legal niceties, the problem here is that it may set a precedent that will have a chilling effect on whistleblowers, and it's clear that those 2010 leaks were in the public interest. They were accepted by, a pretty staid media organisation like the New York Times and the Guardian in London as being of vital importance, and indeed they were.
And what was it? Is there a good example of, one of the leaks of the WikiLeaks that sort of characterized what you're trying to say?
Well, for example, there was a major conflict going on in Afghanistan that the Americans and their allies said they were winning. They were winning the war against the Taliban, and yet the evidence revealed from those military logs showed that civilians were being killed in increasing numbers, and indeed there were an increase in activity by the Taliban. So what we were being told in public over a really major policy like going to war was shown to be false. And I think that's very, very important. It's exactly the kind of thing that journalists should be telling us.
You showed support for Assange when you first published your book in 2012. How has your opinion changed of him since then?
Well, he's not a football player. I support football players. I don't support journalists like that. I supported what WikiLeaks were doing. I thought it was, the content of the revelations were important, but I also thought it was a challenge to both politics, which was drifting into ever more secrecy, and also a challenge to other journalists. Why weren't they able to, tell these stories? Why weren't they revealing these hidden narratives that were so important? And I think that continues to be the challenge. It's not about supporting Julian Assange. I think quite clearly he's a very fallible person. I think he's changed the principles involved with WikiLeaks into something much more personal and political and potentially quite damaging at times. So it's not about Assange, it's about that principle that journalists should be able to break the rules, if you like, to make important revelations.
What do you make of some of the arguments that we've heard, that WikiLeaks, that what he did was putting lives at risk, for instance?
Well, if you mean those revelations, we will never know whether lives are lost. And indeed, it does seem that Assange was less concerned about those risks than the people he worked with. The New York Times and the Guardian had a sort of made him more careful about those things. But there's no evidence, really. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is nobody has ever said that WikiLeaks has released false information. There's plenty of fake news flying around, but the WikiLeaks have never been a fake. And I think that this is the point of journalism, that it's supposed to reveal things without trying to predict exactly what consequences might be. The important thing is that as far as possible, facts should be free.
What will you be watching for in the coming days and weeks with regard to Assange's future?
Well, I think, first of all, in a sense, he's going to enjoy the attention. He enjoys the sort of martyrdom. So if nothing else, it's a kind of, from his point of view, it's a PR success. And I hope that, in a way, we can depersonalize this. It's going to drag on for months, perhaps years. And there are some really important legal principles in America, but also here in the UK. And we should remember, this is a time around the world where journalists are under attack in unprecedented levels from authoritarian figures. So I think, before we start welcoming, the fate of this rather unpleasant chap, we should be thinking much more about the principles for journalism and society in general.
Do you think that that's the subtext to why it is that Ecuador and Assange parted ways, that there is some kind of attack on journalism generally?
I don't want to get conspiratorial about this. I think, journalism is always under attack. And in this case, Assange managed to, make friends with the Ecuadorians when that was convenient to both parties, perhaps in the same way that he sort of made friends, if you like, with Donald Trump when their interests aligned. And unfortunately, he's realizing that if you make those kind of deals and they're not principled, then you may end up being compromised when those interests don't align. So not a conspiracy, more of a mess made much worse by the personality of Julian Assange.
And one last quick question. Would you be comfortable calling Julian Assange a journalist?
I think that what he did, certainly in that period, was journalism. I think WikiLeaks did journalism. Whether you want to call him a journalist or not, I think is another matter. There's all sorts of different kinds of journalists around the world, many of them very campaigning, many of them doing strange things, many of them very unpleasant individuals. So I don't want to restrict that term too much.
Charlie, you definitely don't seem like one of those unpleasant individuals. Lovely to talk to you today. Thank you very much for taking the time. Charlie Beckett, the author of WikiLeaks, News in the Networked Era. He joined us from Austin, Texas.